The international system is shifting, not collapsing, not transforming overnight, but shifting in ways that most people don't see until it's already happened. The structures that kept order for decades are weakening, not because someone decided to tear them down, but because the conditions that made them work no longer exist. And the consequences? They're already here. We just haven't connected the dots yet. Let me walk you through what's actually happening beneath the headlines. Not what you're being told to think about it, but what the mechanics of power, economics, and military reality are actually showing us. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The global system that emerged after 1945 was built on a simple premise. Rules matter more than raw power. International law, treaties, multilateral institutions. The idea was that even great powers would be bound by agreed-upon standards of behavior. It worked more or less for a generation, maybe two. But here's the thing about rules-based systems. They only function when the most powerful players believe following the rules serves their interests. When that calculation changes, the rules don't disappear immediately. They just become selective, applied here but not there, enforced in this case but ignored in that one. What you end up with is something that looks like a legal framework but operates like a balance of power system. States still cite international law, still file papers with international courts, still attend global summits. But the real decisions get made based on who has leverage and who doesn't. Economic weight, military capacity, geographic positioning. This creates a strange kind of instability because everyone can see the gap between what's officially said and what actually happens. And that gap breeds cynicism, not just among adversaries, but among allies and neutral parties too. When the system appears arbitrary, smaller states start hedging. They look for alternative arrangements, new partnerships, different frameworks. The long-term risk isn't that international law becomes meaningless overnight. It's that it becomes a tool used by the powerful against the weak, while the powerful exempt themselves. That's a fundamentally different system than what was designed, and it's far less stable. After the Cold War ended, there was a decade where arms control seemed to be working. Strategic weapons were being reduced. Inspection regimes were in place. Communication channels stayed open. The assumption was that mutual transparency would prevent miscalculation and lower the risk of conflict. Those mechanisms, one by one, have either expired or been abandoned. Treaties that limited certain types of weapons, agreements that prevented deployment in specific regions, protocols for mutual inspection and verification. Most of them are gone now. What replaced them? Not new agreements, not updated frameworks, just nothing. A return to a world where each side develops what it wants, deploys where it chooses, and keeps its capabilities as opaque as possible. The immediate effect is predictable. An arms race. Not the kind you see in movies with dramatic public announcements, but a quiet, technical competition across multiple domains. Hypersonic delivery systems, advanced sensors, space-based assets, cyber capabilities integrated with conventional forces. The deeper problem is that without verification mechanisms, each side has to assume the worst about what the other is developing. Intelligence estimates become worst-case scenarios. Defense planning gets built around maximum threat assumptions. Budgets expand. Doctrines shift toward preemption rather than deterrence. This is how you get spirals. Not because anyone wants war, but because the absence of transparency makes caution look like preparation for aggression. And once that cycle starts, it's very difficult to reverse without the kind of diplomatic infrastructure that no longer exists. Nuclear weapons remain the ultimate backstop in this system. The logic hasn't changed since the early Cold War. If both sides possess large arsenals with second strike capability, neither side can win a nuclear exchange. Mutual destruction isn't a strategy. It's physics. Launch enough weapons, and the environmental and economic aftermath makes the concept of victory meaningless. Yet there's a persistent belief, sometimes stated and sometimes implied, that technical superiority in nuclear forces translates to strategic advantage. Better missiles, more accurate targeting, advanced missile defense. The idea being that if one side has enough of an edge, it could theoretically fight and win a nuclear conflict. This is a dangerous myth. Not because the technology doesn't work as advertised, but because it fundamentally misunderstands what nuclear weapons do at scale. A few dozen warheads hitting major cities and industrial centers would cripple any modern economy. Hundreds would create cascading failures across food production, energy distribution, medical systems, and basic infrastructure. Thousands would alter the climate. The numbers involved in current arsenals are so far beyond any rational military objective that comparisons of who has more become academic. Whether one side has 1,500 deployed warheads and the other has 1,300 is irrelevant if mutual annihilation occurs at 200. Yet defense planners on multiple sides continue to invest in expanding and modernizing these arsenals, not because anyone seriously believes they can be used, but because maintaining parity is seen as essential to deterrence. The problem is that this same logic keeps the door open to catastrophic miscalculation. The negotiations surrounding Iran's nuclear program have been ongoing in various forms for over 2 decades. Multiple agreements have been reached, violated, partially implemented, or abandoned by one party or another. The stated goal is always the same: prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. But look at the structure of the demands being made. Complete dismantling of enrichment infrastructure, permanent limits on research and development, intrusive inspection regimes with no historical precedent. No other country, including those who already possess nuclear weapons, operates under comparable restrictions. From a technical standpoint, Iran crossed the knowledge threshold years ago. The expertise required to enrich uranium exists within their scientific community. You can dismantle centrifuges, but you can't erase knowledge. Any agreement that assumes you can is built on flawed premises. From a strategic standpoint, the demands effectively require Iran to remain in a permanent state of vulnerability while surrounded by states that possess advanced military capabilities, including nuclear weapons in some cases. No government, regardless of ideology, would voluntarily accept that position long term. So what you have is a diplomatic process that creates the appearance of engagement while both sides pursue incompatible objectives. One side wants absolute assurance of non-proliferation. The other wants recognition of sovereignty and regional security. Those two positions don't have a middle ground. The result is a cycle: negotiate, reach partial agreement, compliance erodes, sanctions increase, tensions rise, new talks begin. It's a holding pattern, not a resolution. And holding patterns can't last indefinitely. Military intervention gets discussed periodically as an alternative to diplomacy. Strike the nuclear facilities, degrade the program, set them back years or decades. On a tactical level, it's feasible. Air superiority could be established. Precision strikes could damage key installations. But then what? Destroying facilities doesn't eliminate expertise. It doesn't change the strategic calculation that led to the program's development in the first place. Iran's scientific community would still understand enrichment. Their leadership would still perceive threats from neighboring states. History provides clear lessons here. Military action without a political endgame creates vacuums. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. Each case followed a similar pattern. Regime removed or weakened, infrastructure destroyed, and then years of instability as various factions fought for control. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. The state structure is more resilient. The population is larger. The geography is more defensible. The regional connections are more complex. A military campaign would likely achieve initial objectives, then face the question of what comes next. Regime change by force has a poor track record when the underlying conditions, grievances, power structures, and external pressures that created the original government remain unchanged. You don't end up with a different system. You end up with chaos until a new order emerges, which may or may not align with the original military objectives. Ukraine has been at war for nearly 3 years. The initial phase saw rapid territorial changes. The middle phase settled into grinding positional warfare. The current phase involves attrition across multiple domains: personnel, equipment, economic capacity, and political will. The military situation has reached a point where neither side can achieve decisive breakthrough with current resources. Defensive lines are deeply fortified. Artillery exchanges continue daily. Casualty rates remain high. Advances are measured in kilometers, often at enormous cost. Economically, Ukraine operates on external support. Without sustained aid, the state budget cannot function. Salaries, pensions, basic services all require continuous inflows of foreign capital. This creates dependency that limits autonomous decision-making. Demographically, the war has caused significant population displacement. Millions have left, many of military age. Birth rates have collapsed. Even if hostilities ended tomorrow, rebuilding a functional economy would take decades, and the population base to do so has been substantially reduced. None of this means defeat is imminent or inevitable, but it does mean the costs of continuation are rising while the likelihood of decisive military resolution is declining. The longer the conflict continues, the more severe the long-term consequences for state capacity and social cohesion. For all parties involved, the question is no longer whether victory is possible, but what outcomes are acceptable and at what price. That's a political calculation, not a military one. The underlying security dynamic predates the current conflict by decades. NATO expanded eastward after the Cold War ended. From a Western perspective, this was defensive, offering membership to countries that requested it, building a zone of stability across Europe. From Russia's perspective, this looked like encirclement, a military alliance led by a geopolitical rival moving closer to core territory, despite informal assurances during the 1990s that such expansion wouldn't occur. Both perspectives contain valid security concerns. States on Russia's border have legitimate reasons to seek security guarantees, given historical experience. Russia has legitimate concerns about strategic depth and buffer zones, given geography and past invasions. This is what security dilemmas look like in practice. Actions taken by one side to increase its security decrease the security of the other, which then takes countermeasures, which further reduces the first side's security. Neither side is being irrational from its own frame of reference, but the dynamic produces escalation regardless. Breaking these cycles requires compromise, which means one or both sides accepting outcomes they don't prefer. NATO membership for Ukraine would provide security guarantees for Kyiv, but confirm Moscow's encirclement concerns. A neutral Ukraine would address Moscow's concerns, but leave Kyiv without formal protection. The middle ground is elusive because the core interests are incompatible. Without resolution of the underlying security architecture, any ceasefire or peace agreement will be fragile. The fundamental drivers of the conflict will remain, and future crises become more likely rather than less. Economic sanctions were deployed as a tool to change behavior without military force. Cut off access to financial systems, restrict technology transfers, block energy exports, freeze assets. The goal was to create enough economic pain to force policy changes. The results have been mixed. Yes, there's been economic damage to the targeted state, GDP contractions, currency instability, supply chain disruptions. But the expected political outcome, a change in policy or leadership, hasn't materialized. Instead, adaptation occurred. Alternative payment systems developed. New trade routes emerged. Relationships strengthened with countries not participating in the sanctions regime. Domestic production ramped up in areas previously reliant on imports. The economy became more autarkic, less integrated with Western systems, which was precisely the opposite of the intended long-term effect. Meanwhile, the sanctions created blowback. Energy prices spiked globally. European industries dependent on cheap Russian gas faced crisis. Inflation accelerated across multiple economies. The economic pain wasn't limited to the target, it radiated outward. More significantly, the aggressive use of economic tools as instruments of coercion has prompted many countries to reconsider their reliance on dollar-based financial systems. If sanctions can be deployed this broadly and unilaterally, any country could potentially face similar measures in future disputes. That's created demand for alternatives. BRICS expansion, bilateral currency agreements, development of parallel financial infrastructure. These trends predate the current crisis, but accelerated because of it. The long-term effect may be fragmentation of the global economic system into competing blocs, which would reduce overall efficiency and increase transaction costs for everyone. Military budgets across major powers have increased substantially. The United States, Russia, China, and European states are all expanding defense spending. Some of this is modernization, replacing aging systems with newer technology. Some is expansion, building larger forces and additional capabilities. This creates fiscal pressure. Military spending competes with domestic priorities: infrastructure, healthcare, education, social services. In an era of high public debt, every dollar allocated to defense is a dollar not available elsewhere. For the United States specifically, interest payments on national debt now exceed defense spending. This is historically unprecedented. It means that fiscal space for any new initiatives, military or domestic, is extremely constrained. Tax increases are politically difficult. Spending cuts face resistance from entrenched interests. The result is continued deficit spending, which adds to the debt burden. Eventually, this creates a choice: either reduce military commitments to free up resources for debt service and domestic needs, or maintain commitments while accepting further fiscal deterioration. Neither option is appealing, but avoiding the choice simply postpones the reckoning. Other major powers face similar dynamics with different specifics. The common thread is that military competition is occurring at a time when most states have limited fiscal flexibility. That makes long-term sustainment questionable. Historically, empires and great powers decline, not because they lose a single war, but because they overextend financially while trying to maintain commitments they can no longer afford. The military stays strong right up until the economic foundation gives way. We're watching that tension play out in real time. Put all of these threads together and a pattern emerges. Arms control mechanisms are gone. Nuclear risks remain high. Diplomatic processes are stalled. Military conflicts are grinding forward without resolution. Economic tools are producing fragmentation rather than compliance. Fiscal pressures are mounting. Security dilemmas are intensifying. This is what international disorder looks like. Not chaos in the streets, but a system where the rules are unclear, the power distribution is shifting, and none of the major players trust each other enough to build new frameworks for cooperation. The post-Cold War period, often called the unipolar moment, operated on the assumption that American primacy would create stability through a combination of economic integration and military deterrence. That model is breaking down, not because any single actor willed it, but because the underlying conditions changed. China's rise altered the economic balance. Resource distribution shifted. Technology proliferation reduced military advantages. Regional powers became more assertive. The cost of maintaining global commitments grew while the willingness to bear those costs declined. We're entering a multipolar era, but we don't yet have the institutions or norms to manage it. The old structures were built for a different world. The new ones haven't been negotiated yet. And in the meantime, we're operating in a transitional space where competition is intensifying but guardrails are weak. History suggests these transitions are dangerous, not because war is inevitable, but because the risk of miscalculation goes up when the rules are in flux. Leaders make decisions based on assumptions about how others will react. If those assumptions are wrong because the system has changed, you get surprises. And surprises at the great power level have historically ended badly. The question isn't whether we're headed for disaster. It's whether the current trajectory gets corrected before the accumulated risks produce a crisis none of the players intended. And right now, the signs aren't encouraging.